Good morning again. Let's take a few breaths, shall we? First, exhale, let it out. Deep breath in. And let go. Deep breath in. Let go. Deep breath. Breathe in. And let go. So, for the month of April, our theme we've been exploring has been the power of vulnerability. So fun. So, as a queer, depressive, dyslexic with ADD and a lot of social anxiety, I think I'm an expert in vulnerability. I've been thinking about this. We've been exploring vulnerability this month from a number of different angles. And we really started with this idea that vulnerability is about connection. Vulnerability is about community. Vulnerability is this courageous act that we can make to allow the truth of who we are to be seen. That's it, right? And we've been talking for the last 2 weeks about vulnerability as this courageous act, this community act, this act of love, this act of authenticity, this act of curiosity that we get to make, that we get to explore in building that world that works for everyone that we're always talking about. In order to get there, we've got to be able to open up the stuff we haven't been willing to show each other yet, right? And I've also been thinking about this realization that there's also this other side of vulnerability. That when we're vulnerable by choice, when we're vulnerable in community, when we're vulnerable with a loved one, with a friend, with a community member, when we're trying to go into that deep connective space, that's one kind of vulnerability. But then there's the other kind of vulnerability where we didn't ask for it. And that's the one we don't like, right? The vulnerability when we're with a beloved is that sweet vulnerability, right? But then there's the stuff that happens that rips us open, that makes us feel unsafe, that tears us apart, and that's the other kind of vulnerability. And I realized that, Jason and I have a cat. Her name is Calypso. And she was a feral cat to begin with, and then she made friends with Jason, and moved in, and then we moved in together. And Calypso, she's testy. You know, she has to feel safe in order for us to be able to love up on her. And when we moved into our new house, we had 2 other cats at the time. She spent the first 6 months in the back room in the closet. And anytime anyone tried to get near her, she'd just growl. And then after a couple months, she moved her way out into the bedroom, and then out into the living room. And now she's like snuggling us on the couch, you know? But it's taken a year for her in this new house, for her to feel safe enough, to be vulnerable enough to let us scratch her belly. Right? And without the time and the safety and the container and all of the patience that was required to let her come in her own time and make herself feel safe, I realized how much space she needed in order to do that. And that when we tried to push, when we tried to be like, just come into the living room with everyone else, we would get bit. You know? And so there's this kind of funny thing about vulnerability that we have to access it like that testy cat. You know, that if we don't feel safe, vulnerability is not a fun place to be. Right? And that's something that requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of connection. It requires the people in our lives to be able to create space for us, to be able to open up the truth of who we are and let it out. Because As you know, as many of us know, as Brene Brown talks about, our vulnerability is often attached to the parts of us that we don't want each other to see, which is often attached to the things that we are ashamed of. And I'm realizing that in order for us to be vulnerable with each other, we probably first have to be able to be vulnerable with ourselves. Right? How many of you are comfortable with yourself? Just being with you. How many of you can look at yourself in the mirror and just like, I love you? Right? Right? There's a somewhat of an uncomfortability, I think, for some people to really be with ourselves, to be with what we're feeling, to be with what's happening inside of us. Because there's so much that we think and feel and believe, so much that we've internalized that may be difficult for us to look at. And the longer we don't look at it, the harder it's going to be to deal with. And I find that spiritual practice, whatever it is, but I'm going to talk about meditation, spiritual practices are the things that invite us to sit with ourselves. To really sit with ourselves. Have any of you ever read the book or seen the documentary Dharma Brothers? Oh, one person. Well, I highly recommend reading the book or seeing the documentary called Dharma Brothers. I'm going to give you a really short synopsis. There's a teacher who teaches a 10-day Vipassana meditation class, which is 10 days of 12 hours a day, sitting in silent meditation, doing nothing but paying attention to your breath and observing what's happening inside of yourself. 12 hours a day for 10 days. Anybody want to do this? I'm like thinking about doing it. Yeah. So there's a teacher who took this practice into one of the most difficult prisons in Alabama. And it was all like violent offenders, long-term residents. And he brought this 10-day meditation retreat to the prison. And people were able to volunteer to participate in it. And this group of men sit through this 10-day practice of sitting in silence, just being with themselves. And watching some of the interviews with some of these men who live in horrible conditions, who've lived there for years upon years upon years, say, this is the most difficult thing I've experienced in this place. And the teacher talks about being in these moments where it's silent, and then suddenly you just hear weeping, screaming, crying, because these men are sitting with themselves. And perhaps the things that they've been running from, perhaps the anger, the violence, the pain, the abuse, whatever's spinning around inside of them that they've been avoiding their entire life, suddenly there's nowhere to go, and there it is. And then you have to confront it. You have to make friends with it. You have to forgive it. You have to accept it. You have to open it. You have to give it to God. Right? That is the kind of vulnerability that I think we're actually looking to get to. Can you sit with yourself? Can you sit with your pain? Can you sit with your fear? Can you sit with the emptiness, with the fullness, with the sadness, with the joy? Can you sit with it? And really allow it to move inside of you. Because when we're truly willing to reach deep down inside of ourselves and feel what is there, that's when the healing can start. And when the healing starts, that's when the truth of who we are actually starts to come out. Right? As we've been talking about authenticity in the last month, you know, I've been watching this experience of some of us going, if I was really authentic, you wouldn't like what came out of me. It's like, well, that's because that's your healing process. And your true authenticity is what's underneath all that stuff that wants to come out of you. So we've got to be willing to let it all move, let those layers unfold, let the stuff that life has poured on top of us move through us so that the truth of who we are can actually show up. Because so much of the world out there is showing up from their pain, from their reactions, from all the stuff that we've stuffed down and aren't dealing with, and then we show up in the world and just vomit it out everywhere on everybody else. And that's not the way to do this. There's a better way. But we have to be willing to sit with ourselves, to sit with our own vulnerability, and be in the practice of letting go of who we think we are. Letting go of our stories. Letting go of all the layers. To let the something more show up. Vulnerability is about dropping our boundaries. It's about putting down our borders. It's about being more open, right? So take your left hand, go like right over back, just touch it back your head right here. Your parietal lobe is back here, just in case you didn't know. Thank you. The parietal lobe is a portion of your brain that allows you to know where your body ends and another body begins. The parietal lobe tells you where you are in space and time, your relationship to other objects, to boundaries of your body. Guess what happens when you sit and meditate? Blood flow to the parietal lobe slows down. Electrical activity in the parietal lobe slows down. Quite literally, your brain's ability to perceive your boundaries and edges starts to melt away. So what is meditation but a practice in opening ourselves and letting our borders down? And if we're not comfortable letting our own borders down, if we're not practiced in opening up that safe space for ourselves, what are we going to do? We're going to look at all the ways in the world we can build those borders to protect ourselves. So we'll build a wall, we'll start a war, we'll do whatever we can to keep ourselves safe. Because there's this belief that when we let our borders down, we're vulnerable, and when we're vulnerable, we're not safe. But what if, when we let our borders down, we open ourselves up to merge with the greater truth of who we are, with life around us, to the oneness that connects us with each other. And perhaps the greatest thing we can do to be in love with each other is to let our borders down and remember our connection. Remember that there's only one of us here. Remember that we are here for each other. And then from that space of love and connection, be the people who are willing and able to hold that safe space, to see with love, to listen with compassion, to be present to those around us who might be in situations that make them feel vulnerable and unsafe. We who are practiced can be that safe place. The world needs people who are safe to be vulnerable with. And this practice of community is the place where we get to be in practice with each other. To practice seeing, to practice listening, to practice reflecting back and forth, but also to be in that deeper place of awareness that the people here are willing to hold me in whatever it is that I'm going through. And my friends, we're living in a world that makes a lot of people feel vulnerable. Our planet is in a situation of vulnerability. Many people's ways of life and ways of being are in places of vulnerability. Let that vulnerability call from us our higher selves, our greater selves, the fierce truth of who we are, not the fear that comes with it. Let us be a people who are open to greater possibilities. Let us be a people who are open to hold each other in the pain, to open ourselves up to those vulnerable spaces, to let our borders fall away, and be in the love with each other. Take a deep breath. And let go. Take another deep breath in. and let go. If it's comfortable, close your eyes and take another deep breath. And for the next couple moments, just breathe deeply. And as you breathe, feel yourself settle into this moment. Feel your own body, yourself sitting in the chair. And just breathe. And if you can, in your mind's eye, as you continue to breathe, just expand your awareness and imagine that the borders of your body start to melt away. And just listen to the breathing of the room. Feel yourself as part of a community, as part of a body of individuals who are all seeking to breathe, to deepen, to open, and to connect. Let us feel our collective heartbeat. Let us feel the presence of love that is here in this place. And let us make a commitment to ourselves to live our lives with hearts wide open, eyes willing to see the truth. Let us be a people who are open to each other and willing to hold each other through all that life has to bring to us. And so take a deep breath in. And as we breathe, let us just remember that there is indeed one seamless presence that is living and breathing throughout the entirety of the universe. That this one is living and breathing in everyone and everything. One life, one power, one presence, one love. I call it God. But what I know is that it is the truth of who I am and the truth of each person here. That each one of us are the unique ways in which the divine reveals itself in the world. That each one of us is filled with unique possibilities. That at the core of who we are, there is a divine expression waiting to shine through each one of us. So let us be a people who are willing to sit with ourselves, to be willing to sit with each other, to allow that which is within us to move, to breathe, to rise up, to be healed, so that the truth and the light and the power and the presence of who we really are can shine through our eyes into the world, so that we can be a people who are the safe space that allows those around us to feel safe, to be vulnerable, to open their hearts and minds, to allow their inner beingness to move and to allow their authenticity to shine. Let us be the permissionaries that the world needs to live in a new way. Let each one of us open up and let the light of God shine through us. And so I just speak a word for this community of Center for Spiritual Living Santa Cruz and for these people. That we are a people who are rising into new ways of being. We are learning to live out loud. We are curious. We are authentic. We are vulnerable. We are stepping into a greater truth. And I'm grateful for it all. And so let us just be continuously in this process of community evolution and individual expansion. Let us be in it together. And so I just bless it all and let it be. And so it is. Thank you, friends. Heather, Yalalati.